Hi everyone, this is Keith Stone again with the Center for Hellenic Studies, and today we're here for an online open house with the Kosmos Society. And our guest today is Greg Nagy, well known to all of us. He is the Francis Jones Professor of Classical Literature at Harvard University, Professor of Comparative Literature at the same institution, and the Director of the Center for Hellenic Studies. And I was just looking at your CV this morning, Greg, and
Yes.
I counted 14 books, and I got lost after 100 articles, so
My goodness.
Not bad.
Not bad.
And we're here to talk about the Aeneid, particularly books 4, a little bit of 5 maybe, and 6.
Yes.
And I can say that the book
Yes.
club, the Kosmos Society book club, I think has read through Aeneid 4 and are about to embark on 5 and 6. So it's a good transition.
Oh, good.
Kind of review
I see. So I'm getting people ready for 5 and 6. Oh, excellent. Excellent.
Mm-hmm.
Oh, that's wonderful.
Yeah. So just take it away.
All right. And please reassure me that all of you out there will interrupt me at any point, because otherwise, if I hear myself talking 5 minutes, 10 minutes, I'll start getting very worried. Okay? Now, I like to start with a joke that if for some reason a special kind of disease afflicted all senior professors of ancient Greek literature, and they all died instantaneously, all at the same time. And then we could use magic to bring to our present time the poets of the age of Emperor Augustus. I like to play the game of who would wind up where, at which university. And I'm convinced, dear friends, that Virgil has Greek literature and Greek poetry hardwired in his head, in his heart. There's just nothing he doesn't know. So I'm hoping that he would come to Harvard as the professor of Greek. Trouble is, I think he probably wouldn't want to come to Harvard. I think Horace would want to come to Harvard. And I bet Virgil would want to go to the Institute for Advanced Study in Princeton, where he wouldn't have to teach. That's just my joking guess. But seriously, this person not only knows Homeric poetry, which we all know and love, but also the poetry of the cycle, and is very familiar with Hellenistic poetry, at which point there were two different ways of reception for Homer. One was to try to get to the basic text, and other was to have as many variants collected as possible. And Virgil really straddles the fence. He does both. He really does everything. And so I cannot run out of words of praise for Virgil's understanding of Homeric poetry. I have even done in the past various seminars where if people don't know any Greek, I say, all right, let's just pretend there is no Greek literature left, and let's do Greek literature by way of Virgil. Okay, enough praise. And then think of the fact that there are 12 so-called books of the Aeneid. And when you look at the size of the books, the size resembles Homeric books, quote unquote. And for papyrus technology, this was not very economical. It's not that any given book of the Iliad or book of the Odyssey or book of Virgil's Aeneid needs more room, because a Ptolemaic papyrus, for example, could accommodate about 2,000 verses. And Virgil's verses gravitate towards 1,000 or less, just as Homeric verses per rhapsody do. So even in that respect, even in terms of numerology, there are all sorts of similarities. Isn't it interesting that the first 6 scrolls of the Aeneid of Virgil correspond roughly to the 24 scrolls of the Odyssey, and then the second 6 scrolls correspond roughly to the 24 scrolls of the Iliad. So it's Odyssey first, Iliad second. Also, the scroll that I am least familiar with, which is scroll 5 of the Aeneid, is very much like scroll 23 of the Iliad. So 5 of the Aeneid with the funeral games for Anchises is very similar to 23 of the Iliad. Something else that really strikes me, my old professor, Cedric Whitman, used to say that if you really study the athletics that are being portrayed in Iliad 23, you will see that whoever is participating in a given athletic event is actually recapitulating in one way or another his life as a warrior in epic. So there's a curious parallelism between the life of the athlete in epic and the event, the athletic event of that same hero in funeral games. In the Iliad, of course, it's the funeral games for Patroclus. In the Aeneid, it's for Anchises, who had died a year ago.
Also, really, if I could interrupt, as I know you would love.
Please.
That's really interesting to me because we talk a lot in Heroes about how athletics are a reenactment of the actual heroes.
Yes.
And this is another kind of layer of reenactment where the hero reenacts his own life in microcosm.
Exactly.
So
and then there are wonderful twists. I go around saying to people that if Hector's fire had succeeded in burning down the ships of the Achaeans, the idea is that there would not only be no more Achaeans left in the world, but no Greeks in the post-heroic age either. So the stakes are very high that the fire of Hector should be stopped, should be quenched. And of course, it's Patroclus who does it for Achilles. In that sense, Patroclus is prefiguring Achilles as the savior of the Achaeans, because there wouldn't be Greeks, supposedly, if the fire had burned down the ships. So now we go to Aeneid 5, where, bad news, the women of the Trojans are so sick and tired of traveling around and following their menfolk that they set on fire the ships of the Trojans before they ever make it to the mainland of Italy. And it's a lucky thing that the fire is put out and only 4 of the ships are damaged beyond repair. But Virgil is playing here with, again, the high stakes of these shipfaring Trojans. Could I also say now, in general, before I go to Aeneid 6 and then go back to Aeneid 4, something about what happens in the second half of the Aeneid? And this is very relevant, as some people think, to the conflicts in the region of what we can say broadly as Palestine, and the conflicts between Arabs and Jews, and the fact that the state that officially represents that area is really Israel and not Palestine. And if you don't mind, I'll cheat and go to the end of the Aeneid, where Zeus makes a very interesting speech about how the Trojans, who finally make it to Italy, how they will be a key part of the destiny of Rome, but they will have nothing to do with the name of the Roman Empire that is about to be, or even with the language of the Roman Empire, which is going to be Latin. It's going to be the language spoken by the other side, the side that Aeneas and his men are fighting, the side that is represented by Turnus. And I say this because there were Israeli intellectuals in the past who, in a romantic way, were trying to identify themselves with the Trojans. And then the point is that if you identify yourself with the Trojans, that means that eventually your language will not be the dominant language in the state that will evolve. It'll be the other side's language. And even the name of your society will be named after the other side and not your side, in the sense that the Roman Empire is Latin. So there are all sorts of interesting political takeaways about the Iliadic part of the Aeneid, which we won't fully be able to get into. But I did want to meditate on that particular point, because it's interesting when you run into people who think that all of the agenda of the Aeneid are no longer interesting. They're very interesting, very relevant, whichever point of view you take.
Mm-hmm.
Now,
Greg, do you remember where that was published? I seem to remember reading that recently. Was it in Eidolon?
It was done by somebody who works for Donna Zuckerberg in in that organization called Paideia.
Okay.
And I think if we do a search in Paideia, we'll find the article. It's very clever.
Okay. Yeah, I remember reading it. Okay.
Okay. So now, what I want to do is bridge from 4 to 6, and I want to concentrate on Dido, who in Shakespearean English was pronounced Dido, as we see in Shakespeare's Tempest, where she has this rhyming name, the widow Dido. But anyway, we say Dido, and I'll say Dido. The way she dies and the way she curses Aeneas, who is, of course, going to be the founder of the Roman Empire, whereas she is a prototype of the Carthaginian Empire, the way that all happens it is not only interesting as a historical irony, in the sense that this smoldering love affair will eventuate in a win-all or take-all, or lose-all, I'm sorry, win-all or lose-all war or set of wars that Rome will eventually win. I want to emphasize how the whole anger, resentment of Dido goes beyond, of course, the political. It has not only political significance, it is arguably one of the greatest romances of world literature. And as my old professor at Indiana University used to say, when Aeneas finally meets Dido in Hades, in Aeneid 6, and where Aeneas basically says to Dido, I can explain everything. Dido turns around and says nothing. And so my professor used to say that that encounter between Aeneas and Dido in Aeneid 6 is, quote, the greatest snub in the history of literature, unquote. And it is a terrific snub. Similar snubs are hard to find. One of my favorites is in Sophocles' Women of Trachis, where at a crucial point where the wife of Heracles, who has been jilted by Heracles, should be just uttering a stormful of words of rage against Heracles. What she does instead is turn around and say nothing. it's almost more effective as a form of condemnation.
Greg, can I just ask? Because I was thinking of
Yes.
an encounter
Yes.
similarly in Hades that some of our newcomers might be familiar with, which is Odysseus. Doesn't he get a bit of a snub from Ajax? It's not a romantic snub, but
you're right. That is a very good snub as well, because there it's Odysseus who is sort of saying, let me try to explain Ajax. And here again, there is a mighty snub. Sarah, I'm so glad you mentioned that, because actually I bet that Virgil had that snub in mind when he composed the snub done by Dido. But I want to bring something else into the picture having to do with the speech of Aeneas, where he says, let me try to explain. However, I don't want to do it until we maybe clear the air and talk about things that I might have left out or further comments. And then I do want to maybe share with you, if you don't mind, my own translation of Aeneas's attempt to explain what happened. So let's see whether we have any comments and questions and yeah.
May I step in and say the following?
Please.
You established the Iliadic, let's say, connection to Aeneid in these passages, and I think perhaps we could mention the Odysseic connection, the opposite Odysseic connection. Yes. With there is a line that in a way stood out in my reading. That's the sister of Dido, yes. Anna, who actually tells her, in Latin I cannot translate, weave a delay for him, causes for delay. Yes, and somehow this word, and it is one of the very basic vocabulary for the epic cycle anyway, the weaver, and even, in a bit later on in Metamorphosis, how the prototypical weaver, Arachne, with Athena,
beautiful.
And so on.
Yes, come in. It's Kevin who is here, and I forgot that I'm not supposed to be in this office today.
I have a call coming in at noon from Thailand or Madagascar.
Oh my God! Wow. So say hi. Say hi to everyone.
Hello.
Hello.
Hi, it's Kevin.
Hello, Kevin.
Hey, Kevin.
So what I can do is go into another room.
Just 5 or 10 minutes.
What's that?
Just for 5 or 10 minutes.
So like, I'll go to another room, okay?
Is that possible?
Yes, of course it is. Of course. So let me, and Yoria, keep your thoughts exactly where they were as I go from one place to another. Hang on.
Okay.
This is the last word.
Now we're getting a tour of the classics department.
Yes. So let's see. I'm going to find a room. See, there's somebody there.
This is like reality TV.
No.
Well, Aeneas might wander a bit, and Greg's wandering as well.
Yes.
It's the wandering.
A tour.
But we missed the tour.
Teresa,
Yes.
can I hang out somewhere other than my office, because Kevin needs it?
Oh, sure.
And I'm doing a Google hangout. Put me anywhere.
Why don't you go and
The good thing about this incident is that everybody will wonder, was it intentions or is it a cryptic meaning behind it?
Hi, Mark. So I'll introduce Mark. Here's Mark. See this way, everybody,
Yes.
say hi, Mark.
Hello.
This is a Google Hangout.
All right.
Hi.
Sure. Yeah.
Are you sure?
Yeah.
I'm sorry to do this to you. I'm the wandering. So this is really okay.
Yeah, absolutely.
Oh, thank you, dear Mark.
Yeah. Okay.
Thank you so much. This is perfect.
Okay, good.
Thank you.
Okay.
See ya. Bye. Okay, Yoria, continue exactly where you left off. Okay.
So there's this thing about weaving. Anna says weave causes for delay. for Aeneas. And then, you know, there are these words that obviously ring bells, and you wonder, they can't be, let's say, without a meaning. And then this establishes a connection between the women, obviously the Dido, the dominant women of the Aeneid, with the other women in Odyssey, for example. And weaving and clothing, it's a component. And then even the Augustan age, weaving was
I love it.
A very significant domestic activity linked with piety and Augustan, let's say, moral issues or moralistic issues, that's a matter. And then there is, by a peculiar establishment of this connection between the women in Aeneid and the women in Odyssey, I was trying to understand the similes of Dido to Artemis, for example, which in a way is not so, let's say, so obvious that one establishes, because the very obvious simile we have Nausicaa with Artemis, and it's very, so in a way, very coherent with Dido. We have to think about, and yes, I'm wondering about all these connections and all this, let's say, all this context in the Augustan period. We know Artemis was as significant together with Apollo. She was sang, and Horace's Carmen. So all these things. So in a way, the more you read, the more you think that nothing is just there for the sake of ornament or the sake for.
I so agree. That was beautiful. Yeah.
So that would be my, let's say, no.
I love it. I love it.
I have a question here from our chat. What happened between Homer's time and Virgil's time to account for the huge differences?
Now you
Oh, can you hear me? Maybe we've lost Greg. It seems like Greg is frozen. Well, let's just wait a minute.
It says your network connection is experiencing difficulties.
That seems
Check your
accurate.
connectivity. And but is it me?
Let's see. Maybe the Wi-Fi isn't so great in that little room. But
well, maybe. Well, why don't I go to Harvard University, which is another one? Let's see what happens if I.
Okay. Oh. I bet Greg will have to rejoin. In any case, the question was about the differing descriptions of the underworld between Homeric poetry and this poem of Virgil, which is a great question. What differences?
Okay, now I can see you and hear you. Is it better? Can you hear me?
We can hear you. Yep.
Okay, that's good enough. Okay. So anyway, I really enjoyed the comment of Yordia, and I quite agree that nothing is coincidental in Virgilian poetry, that Virgil connects with everything, and Yordia is absolutely right that the Odyssey is as important for the whole shaping of the Aeneid as is the Iliad. In fact, even more so. It's no accident that the Aeneid starts with the Odyssean part and then ends with the Iliadic part. So I quite agree. Other comments?
Yeah, well, while you were experiencing network difficulties, I was beginning to read a question that is as follows. What happened between Homer's time and Virgil to account for the huge differences in the descriptions of the underworld? Wow, what a coincidence. I think that Greg lost his connection again in the middle of that question.
Unmute now, and I'm unmuting. Is this good?
Wonderful.
Good.
Did you hear the question that I was reading?
Yes, I did, actually. Yes.
Oh, good. So what does account for those differences in the underworld scenes?
Well, as my dear friend and colleague Douglas Frame shows in his book Hypotanestor, even in Odyssey 11, there are major conflicts of traditions that are played out within that one epic. So it's just a fact of life that visits to the underworld appeared in many different varieties. There's not only the Homeric tradition to deal with, there is the Athenian tradition, which is later, versus the Ionian tradition, which is earlier. There is also the looming figure of Orpheus, Orphic poetry, which prominently features, I saw this and I saw that, for experiences in the lower world, are definitely played out in the Odyssey. And I do recommend, for those who are curious, a reading of Douglas Frame's analysis of Odyssey 11. Once you read that, you realize, of course, there are going to be all sorts of differences between the Odyssey and the Aeneid. And there are differences even within the Odyssey. There are differences even within the Aeneid. And there are many, many, many contending traditions.
Mm-hmm.
Oh,
one other question.
Yeah,
go ahead.
Go ahead. No, I was going to be inspired to say what the Sibyl said about Avernus, which is the birdless place. I still remember it. It's faculis descensus Averno, noctes aqua dies, patet atrianua ditis, sed revocare gradus superas, evadere ad auras, hoc opus hic labor est. Difficult is the descent to the birdless place. Day and night, the door of gaping Hades is waiting. But to recall your step and to come back to the air up above, that is the real task. That is the labor. It's just amazing. And what that is also saying is, it's very easy to start imagining how this transitional phase of an afterlife may be. But the more you study the variations, the more difficult it is, and the more easy it is to get stuck, which is for me the biggest fear about Hades. As you all know, I think Hades is a transitional thing, not an eschatological thing where you wind up. But that said, the transitions can vary greatly depending on how you worship your own ancestors and your own locale. What group you come from, in the case of Virgil versus quote unquote Homer, even the differences in era, the fact that Hellenistic poetry comes between, which is always something that will mess things up. So there's every reason to expect difficulties, differences, but all I'm saying is that Virgil controls all these traditions in his head and heart, I like to say.
Mm-hmm. And then one other question, maybe before we turn it back over to you. Is there a moralistic approach in Virgil? We've talked about how Homeric poetry doesn't particularly judge what it narrates, but how about Virgil?
Well, this is exactly why I want to read you my translation of Aeneas's attempt to explain, and I have it here in front of me. It's lines 456 through 463, okay, in Aeneid 6. And so here's my translation. This is where Aeneas spots Dido, and I think what he says goes to the heart of your question, dear Keith, about is there moralizing going on inside the Aeneid? So Aeneas says, line 456, if you want to follow, unfortunate Dido, so it was true then, the news that I got. It came to me and said that you had perished, that you had followed through on your final moments with a sword. So your death, was caused by me? But I swear by the stars and by the powers above and by anything here that I could swear by under the earth in its deepest parts, Unwillingly, Queen, did I depart from your shore, but I was driven by the orders of the gods, which force me even now to pass through the shades, passing through places stained with decay and through the deepest night. Yes, I was driven by their projects of empire. And when I say projects of empire, referring to the projects of the gods, I'm translating simply imperiis egere suis. More literally, they compelled me with their imperia, which is the plural of imperium, which is empire. And I found it easier to understand it if I translate projects of empire. So I couldn't help it. I was driven by the imperial projects of the gods, who have it in mind for me, Aeneas, to be the founder of Rome. So I would say that's moralizing. And in my work on this passage, I won't talk about how the lyric poet Catullus had already played with the idea that I left your shore, O Queen, unwillingly. Let's not go there today because we don't have time. I do want to say, however, that Athens, which had its own propaganda and its own poetics about empire, had a hero, Theseus, which means the founder, who very similarly left behind a beautiful queen who had fallen in love with him, and that is, of course, Ariadne. And so in my research, I think I've been able to prove that Virgil is thinking of the projects of empire as understood by Athens in the 5th and 6th centuries BCE. And there's an there's a wonderful vase painting dating to the 5th century, which actually shows Theseus being awakened by Athena while he is sleeping next to Ariadne. And off he goes for his own projects of empire, because, you know, the Athenian propaganda is that Theseus, the founder of Athens, takes over from the thalassocracy, the sea empire of King Minos, whose daughter is Ariadne. I'm trying to say this as quickly as possible, but I think the idea is that basically it's Theseus's obligation to leave his beloved Ariadne, just as it's Aeneas's obligation to leave his beloved Dido. And I find the rationalization that duty supersedes love not very pleasant to think with, and certainly something that can be repellent, and something that was, I think, morally questionable to people who love love stories, but even people with any common sense of decency. I'm not through yet, however, with answering Keith's question about moralizing, but I want to stop here for a moment and see if there are any comments.
Well, I do wonder if we could get you to go back to your office if you think Kevin is done, because we'd like to see you, and like your connection isn't very good there.
Oh, I see. Well, God, okay. Let me.
You think he's done? It's been 15 minutes.
It has been. Okay, in fact, let me explore other places. Maybe Allison has another place. Okay, hang on.
In the meantime, may I ask something, or can you hear us, or is it?
Yes, I could still hear you. So why
Okay.
don't you ask stuff while I roam the world? Let's see.
Okay, there's back to the question about Aeneas telling Dido is not my fault and this is beyond me and so on.
Yeah.
There is in book 4, Jupiter himself says this is not, why is he delayed there in Carthago? He's not. This is not.
So guys, my audio is very bad there. Can I go somewhere else? Or maybe Kevin is finished with my office.
I don't know.
Let me see. See you tomorrow.
See you tomorrow.
Yeah, good.
Good. I'm going to send you a program tonight.
Can
so
you?
you
Good.
see where you are.
Good.
You're kind
Good.
of more towards the end. Yeah.
Okay.
Okay.
And it'll be serious, but there'll be a funny part. Is that
Good.
okay? Good.
That's absolutely
Good.
good.
Okay, I'm going back to my office and see what the story is.
If your office isn't free, I could probably let you into like Richard's or something.
Okay. Well,
I mean,
yeah, but I'd hate to.
I mean,
Let's see. Let's see how the cubby holes are.
Okay. Oh, actually, Carlo's gone.
Who?
Carlo. I think Allison said there's events in here, like
Okay.
exams and stuff.
Carlo's office.
Carlo.
Carlo, yeah, actually.
Yes, that's Jordan. Which one's Carlo? Okay.
Thank you, Ivy. That's brilliant.
One's all clean.
Oh, it's all clean. Oh my God, a clean office. Oh wow. Oh wow. Okay, let's see. Georgia, is this good? Keith?
Yes, it's perfect. Thank you.
Is it
Actually,
much
if you hear
better?
us, it's very good.
We can hear you.
Yes,
Can you
much
turn
better.
your camera back on?
Okay.
Now that
Okay.
you're back in the land of good internet.
Yes. I'm so glad. Okay. So now Georgia was talking, so, right?
Yes. Yes, but going back to Aeneas, what he says to Dido, it's not my fault, just trying to justify his leaving her, abandoning her,
Yes.
whatsoever, however one interprets. It is already in book 4 where Jupiter clearly says, why is he delaying somewhere around 230? Why is he delaying there? His job is to rule Italy, Italia, Italia, not Italy, Italia. And to bring the whole world under the laws of the Romans. So in a way, I would say it's we can find, let's say, agenda that in a way complies with the Augustinian agenda.
Oh yes.
But the thing is that he has to fulfill the promise, and the promise is to continue the line of creation of the Roman myth of creation. Actually, this is in a way their Latinogonia or Romanogonia, we could say, because this is in a way they decide. This is where we in a way we have the line of our ancestors, and this is where we start.
Yes.
So
I love that. I love that. This ties in with Keith's earlier question about moralizing. I mean, the part that really doesn't appeal to me at all is where he is told, again in Aeneid 6, tu reger imperio populos Romane, you, Roman, will rule the people with your imperium. And so there it is. It's imperial poetry. It doesn't particularly appeal to me, but that's just the fact of history, that is the destiny of Aeneas. And I can't really rationalize that or justify it morally. What I can do is say that Virgil is such a good poet that the love story aspect of this whole narrative is more interesting and more compelling and maybe more psychologically perceptive than anything else. So without trying to make excuses for Virgil, I do think that his poetry is very powerful.
No, and if I may step in that, it is uncomfortable for us to accept imperial, poetry whatsoever. But the thing is, there is a certain ambiguity in the messages. If you have the most sympathetic, or one of the most sympathetic heroines is Dido, and she's actually the queen of Carthago, and the Romans had the Carthaginian drama, being defeated by them. So in a way, it is, we go back to this very nice, let's say, for me, depiction of always the Trojans being in a way the nicer. Yeah, actually, they're likable. They are the likable. When somebody, So it's not just,
No, I agree. It's something that people who specialize in Roman literature debate forever about whether the the poetry is compromised, whether Virgil, being the smart person he is, whether he is somehow subverting the Roman Empire or not. And I honestly think that we'll never have an answer for it. It's just too complicated. I don't see enough subversion to convince me that the Aeneid really is subversive. And I would even say that for Ovid, even though Ovid is so naughty and supposedly he is exiled because he is so méchant. I think that's part of his poetic success, and it's very hard to figure out whether he really got into trouble. Some people even think that his exile is more a poetic topos than a real place of exile, but let's not go there.
Dear Greg, before we go any further, could I get you to turn your camera back on?
Oh, okay. What do I click?
Well, if you hover your cursor around, you should see a couple of icons at the top.
Yes.
One is a microphone, one is a little video camera icon.
Yes, and there's an interdicting diagonal line. Should I press it?
Try that.
Okay, okay. Do you see me now?
Yes, perfect.
And you notice now I'm in an empty office. Carlo has vacated it, and it's clean and empty.
May I also ask?
Please.
Dear Greg, well, you just mentioned how certain traits of different heroes like Theseus or Odysseus were appropriated by Virgil and attributed to Aeneas and to this Trojan adventure. Are there any signs probably of the hero Hercules emerging or being appropriated in the Aeneid? Can we talk more about this?
Oh yes. Oh, thank you. And you know, I'm pretty sure you know more about this than I do. But Hercules in the Greek West is very complicated, and in a sense, Virgil gives us a very interesting synthetic view where the monster that Heracles or Hercules defeats is called Kakos. How synthetic a monster can you have, Mr. Bad Guy? And in general, the whole Hercules theme, which of course is very interesting for the Iliad as well, and the Odyssey, is a subtext of the Aeneid. And in many ways, the West can appropriate Heracles in a more direct way than even the East. So thank you for bringing that in. So once again, we see a situation where what we might call the prototype of Achilles and Odysseus put together, which is Heracles, as we see in the Homeric hymn to Heracles, that figure is alive and well in the poetics of Virgil.
Because I was thinking also, you know, about the people in Sicily and Stesichorus, and how, for example, Stesichorus presents Heracles in the Geryon, and you just also alluded to Hercules' importance going to West. So I was wondering whether this appropriation of Hercules was important for not for Virgil, but also for people in Sicily and in Magna Graecia.
Oh yes.
And how this, in a way, is being embedded into Virgil's work.
I think that's absolutely right. And again, Virgil will not miss an opportunity to integrate figures from Greek mythology and poetics, especially synthetic figures. And Hercules, aka Heracles, is a prime candidate. And I'm glad you mentioned the lyric poet Stesichorus, because he is the #1 representative of lyric transmission of these important traditions in the West. So
I remember, because I read in your book Pindar's Homer, that you also mention the importance of Stesichorus, not only for lyric poetry but also for the lyric genre altogether.
Absolutely.
And I found what you wrote in this book very important in order to understand why Stesichorus is a milestone in the evolution of the lyric genre.
Yes, he certainly is. And he was a spectacular impresario as well as a great poet and director. And from what little we know about his concert tours, those choral performances must have been so spectacular as to make people gape in wonderment. Yeah, very important. And not only for Heracles' theme, there's, for example, the Orestes theme, the Oresteia theme. In many ways, if we want to understand the ambitions of Aeschylus in the East, it would be trying to be as spectacular as Stesichorus is in the West. And then isn't it funny that then Aeschylus travels to the West and actually stages his Persians and then other spectacular things like the Women of Etna. I would give anything to see Aeschylus's Women of Etna. So we tend to forget about the Greek past of the West, which Virgil has also inherited.
Exactly.
So thank you for that observation.
Thank you for your wonderful answer.
Greg, may I ask you a question about the underworld?
Yes.
Maybe find a similar agenda in Socratic optimism of dialogues, which he supposes to have in the underworld, but which we don't hear except for this little mentioning of Achilles.
Yes, yes. Well, earlier I mentioned the Orphic traditions, where even the way Odysseus says in recounting his sojourn in Hades, I saw this and I saw that and I saw the other thing. That Orphic tradition, of course, we shouldn't simply identify with that name Orpheus. It represents an older, pre-Homeric way of looking at transition from the world of light and consciousness to the through the world of darkness and unconsciousnness and then back again. And so it's not just Orphic. And if I may go back again to the book of Douglas Frame, I think he is very successful in showing that we can see a clear difference between an Athenian layer, I shouldn't say layer, an Athenian phase of Hades traditions, and then an earlier Ionian phase, and usually focusing on who are the great mortal females who have had love affairs with gods. And since I put so much emphasis on Ariadne, could I say that I love the way in Odyssey 11, Ariadne is featured as somebody who died in such a way that Dionysus was a witness. So all the stories we see in Catullus about how Ariadne gets matched up with the god Dionysus himself after he's abandoned by Theseus, there's a clear reference to it, albeit an opaque one, in Odyssey 11. Why am I bringing this up? Because certainly when Ariadne is abandoned, she goes into a rage, a furor, a fury. And I argue in an article that Keith edited for me in Classical Inquiries, that it was the rage of a woman who is deceived by a man, It's that rage that really attracts Dionysus. So he just goes for that kind of emotion, is attracted to it from a million light years away. If he spots some beautiful woman being very angry at a former lover, he will want to move in, so to speak. And that's what happens already in Odyssey 11. That's certainly what happens in Catullus. And I would argue it happens all over the place. So thank you for that question. I hope that I didn't detour your question too much in the direction of Ariadne, but your question does open the doors to all of these variations on the transition from Hades to somewhere else. Thank you.
So I have a question, if I may, about Hercules, going back to Hercules. There is, for me, Catullus actually was, in a way, putting Hercules on the podest of the cultural heroes. So, and I think Virgil is very aware of that, and Aeneas should be a cultural hero too for the Romans. And there are certain, let's say, similarities with Hercules, but for me, the key similarity is that the transition from mortality to immortality, which doesn't appear obviously so often, is a special occasion and very well deserved for Aeneas in the Roman myth. But actually, even there, one could argue that because of the, let's say, contrast between Hercules and Aeneas actually, they're both, let's say, driven by fury, and this is a common topos. But
yes.
At the end, Aeneas seems to be driven for something that happened on others and not Pallas. So there is, let's say, a differentiation that perhaps Virgil pushes a point to prove that here there's something different, and it is, of course, it's not so obviously demonstrated, but one can argue that it's not as easy to just claim that Virgil just produces, let's say, an unproblematic description of the hero. There is, there is a differentiated and to a certain degree sophisticated image of Aeneas. Which in a way soothes us when we accept, and it's true that it is to be accepted, the imperial poetry parameter.
Well, you made me feel better about Virgil, because I confess to you that it remains for me an obstacle that he is the state poet of Augustan Rome, because I don't like Augustus, I don't like Augustan Rome. But that said, the more complex the poetry is, the better I could live with myself in liking it as much as I do.
Not only that, on top of that, he tries to imitate Homer. How worse one can get.
Yeah, exactly. Thank you. Thank you. Exactly. Mm-hmm.
Craig, there was a question or a comment from the chat here. It says, about the Aeneid. This is a commissioned work and reminds me of Pindar insofar as it's tailored to a specific agenda in a masterful way.
Yes.
And I forget the exact context in which that was, in which that popped up.
Yeah. I think it's not only commissioned, but the patronage is made very clear, especially in Aeneid 6. So I'm so glad we're talking about Aeneid 6 today and focusing on it. I'm thinking especially of what is called the Parade of Heroes, where Aeneas is given a kind of a tour of Rome and the glories of Rome in the future. And one of the most dramatic moments, anecdotal tradition tells us, is when Marcellus, who is of course so dear to the wife of Augustus, when Marcellus, who died an early premature death, when he is mentioned, and I still remember the words, "Tu Marcellus eris," and you will be Marcellus. At that point, anecdotes tell us the wife of Augustus fainted. And this is a perfect example of what Bakhtin says should never happen in epic, which is that an epic should be hermetically sealed from the post-heroic age. An epic should be a bubble that keeps us in the post-heroic age from making any contact with the characters there or vice versa. And a wonderful example where this doesn't happen is, of course, the prediction of Marcellus, the prophecy that Marcellus will be an important figure in Roman history and then will tragically die. There you have a window from the heroic world into the post-heroic world. And as you know, dear Keith, I study cases of this kind of thing in the Iliad and Odyssey as well. My best example still is in Iliad 20, when Poseidon, who's not on the Trojan side, rescues Aeneas. And Aeneas comes to, what happened to me? Where am I? Poseidon says, well, you're here because I had to rescue you because you're not supposed to die in any one-on-one duel with Achilles, and you're going to be the progenitor of a dynasty for which I will be the patron god. Oops, okay, well, in that case. And so there you have, even in the Iliad, a window from the heroic world into the post-heroic world. So Bakhtin, much as I admire his model building, I think was wrong in implying that there is no window. However, since our questioner brought up Pindar, and I actually saw that question flash on my screen, so it's like 5 minutes ago I got a preview of the good Pindar question. Pindar is a perfect example where the window should be wide open, where the whole idea is that the world of heroes is being relived in the post-heroic world by people who deserve to make contact with the sacred past. And so that's what Pindaric poetry is all about. And earlier, I got this very generous plug from Maria about the book Pindar's Homer. But that's why I called that book Pindar's Homer, because the lyric poet Pindar presents himself as someone who owns the epic past. And that's why my subtitle is The Lyric Possession of an Epic Past. And of course, I play with the fact that if you're going to possess the epic past, you're not only possessing it, but you're possessed by it, by the spirit of it. And whatever you say about Virgil, he is maybe the greatest artist in bridging the heroic past and the post-heroic present. And Scroll 6 is maybe where you can get the best examples, but there are other places as well.
I should say that we're about at time. We should wrap up in a minute or two. So I'd like to call for any last comments from the assembled audience in our Hangout, and then Greg, I'll ask you to just kind of
and then in the meantime, I will chase Kevin out of my office. But wasn't that an adventure? I did a kind of a Hades-like sojourn all the way around Boylston Hall. I don't know. I'm still thinking. But you actually saw all the denizens of Boylston Hall as I was going around. And I even sort of said, oh, look, meet so-and-so, meet so-and-so, didn't I?
That's true. We did have our own little tour.
You opened this window you just mentioned between epic past and post-heroic future.
And to your dismay, you had the Virgilian prototype because you were alone.
That's right. You're absolutely right. I love it. I love it.
You were not the Homeric, you were alone, but not the Virgilian. Yes, sorry.
But I'm so happy that, again, I want to explain, this is a souvenir that Yodia gave me, and it has...
Not for you though.
Oh, but for my granddaughter, but I like it so much, I didn't give it to her. I'm keeping it.
Okay.
I really love it, and it has your daughter's beautiful numbers, etc. on it. So I really like it. You see,
you know, you're aware that we're live, no?
I love it. Colors.
All right. Well.
Well, wait. Somebody says, "My goodness."
It's me. Okay, just finish with that. Okay.
Well, I would like to thank everyone for joining us today.
Well, this is so much fun. I hope you let me visit again because Virgil is such a passion for me. Could I also say that you know, in my old age, I'm actually reading Virgil all the time, and in the book Homer the Classic, there's a whole humongous chapter on Virgil, especially about scrolls 1 and 2. So I'm sorry I missed earlier discussions because I have lots of stuff about snakes and Troy, and Andromache's fabrics, etc., etc. It's just great stuff.
Great. We'll include a link to Homer the Classic.
Oh, thank you.
On the page for this talk. So.
Perfect. And could you also make a link here, Keith? I really want to advertise this for the article about the encounter of Dido and Aeneas and the big snub. Okay. Mm-hmm. Because I even have a vase painting that shows the abandonment. It's heartbreaking. It's really something.
Definitely, will do.
Yay. Okay.
All right. Bye for now, everyone.
Thank you all. Bye.